The corporate takeover that backfired. How I saved our family empire. When they excluded me from my sister Rebecca's engagement announcement at our annual board meeting, I maintained my professional composure despite the crushing weight in my chest. 3 weeks later, with hands that trembled only slightly as I signed the termination papers, I ended our family hotel chain's exclusive partnership with her fiancé's investment firm, costing them a $15 million deal and watching their faces drain of color as they realized the true extent of my authority. Loyalty flows both ways, but disrespect has consequences they never anticipated. Consequences that would reshape not just our business, but the very foundations of what it meant to be a Sterling. If you've ever been sidelined by family members who should have valued your contributions, who should have seen your worth but chose instead to treat you as invisible, you'll understand why I couldn't let this slide. The betrayal cut deeper than any professional slight. It was a wound to the very core of who I thought I was in this family, in this company, in this world I had helped build with my own hands. Before I explain how everything unfolded, the late-night discoveries, the devastating revelations, the moment I realized my own sister was willing to destroy me for her perfect fairy tale ending, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. This corporate family drama taught me invaluable lessons about asserting my worth, about recognizing when love becomes exploitation, about the price of being the dependable one in a family that mistakes reliability for weakness. If you enjoy authentic stories about family betrayal and strategic justice, about finding your voice when everyone expects you to stay silent, please hit that subscribe button and like this video. Trust me, you'll want to see how this all plays out, because what happened next shocked even me. The invisible daughter. I was never meant to be the heir apparent in my family. That destiny belonged to my sister Rebecca from the moment she drew her first breath. The hierarchy in our household wasn't just unmistakable, it was carved in stone, reinforced daily through 1,000 small gestures, comments, and decisions that reminded me exactly where I stood in the Sterling family constellation. Rebecca was the sun around which we all orbited. I was merely a reliable planet, steady and dependable, but never quite bright enough to command attention on my own. At 38, Rebecca possessed the kind of effortless magnetism that seemed to bend reality around her desires. She was tall and willowy, with platinum blonde hair that caught light like spun gold, and eyes the color of Caribbean waters. Her Harvard MBA was displayed prominently in her corner office, though I often wondered how much she actually remembered from those courses, given how often I found myself explaining basic financial concepts to her during our strategy meetings. She could negotiate million-dollar deals over champagne receptions with the same ease most people ordered coffee, making it look like an elegant dance rather than the complex business transaction it actually was. Every gesture was calculated for maximum charm. The way she tilted her head when listening, the musical laugh she deployed at precisely the right moments, the way she could make even the most skeptical investor feel like they were her dearest confidant. I, conversely, was consistently described with words like thorough, strategic, and detail-oriented corporate diplomatic speak for someone who lacked that indefinable sparkle that supposedly mattered in the hospitality industry. My dark hair was always pulled back in practical styles, my clothing chosen for functionality rather than fashion statements. Where Rebecca commanded attention, I earned respect through confidence. Where she inspired, I delivered. Our family enterprise, Sterling Hotel Group, was founded by my grandfather Edmund 45 years ago in a different era of American hospitality. He started with nothing but a single boutique property in downtown Boston, a vision of luxury that felt accessible rather than intimidating, and the kind of work ethic that seemed to have skipped a generation before landing squarely on my shoulders. What started as Edmund's dream had grown into an empire, 12 luxury hotels across the eastern seaboard, each property carefully selected and meticulously managed. I had spent the last 8 years of my life helping expand that empire, often working 16-hour days to ensure every acquisition was sound, every contract favorable, every operational detail perfect. After completing my dual MBA and JD from Northwestern, a grueling 4-year program that left me exhausted, but armed with exactly the skills our family business needed, I had returned home instead of accepting those lucrative offers from McKinsey and Bain in Chicago. Multiple consulting firms had courted me aggressively, offering starting salaries that would have dwarfed what Sterling Hotel Group could pay and career trajectories that would have established me as an industry leader within a decade. But the family business called to me with a voice that was part duty, part love, and part desperate need for the kind of legal and operational restructuring that only someone who truly understood our unique culture could provide. Victoria has always excelled at the technical aspects, my mother Catherine would say with a smile that never quite reached her eyes, as if my expertise in contract law, regulatory compliance, and operational efficiency were charming hobbies rather than the skills that had prevented multiple costly lawsuits and streamlined our profit margins by 40% over 5 years. Her tone always carried that particular brand of maternal condescension reserved for daughters who had somehow missed the point of what being a woman was supposed to mean. In Catherine's world, a world of charity galas, country club memberships, and strategic social positioning, my professional achievements were interesting, but ultimately secondary to my more important failures, my stubborn singleness, my apparent inability to charm the right kind of husband, my tendency to prioritize spreadsheets over social calendars. She's brilliant with numbers. She would tell her friends at their weekly bridge games, as if intelligence were a consolation prize for failing at femininity. Though we do worry she's becoming a bit too focused on work. At 35, you'd think she'd want to settle down, start a family of her own. While Rebecca held the prestigious title of Vice President of Strategic Development, complete with a corner office and an expense account that seemed to have no upper limit, her actual contributions to Sterling Hotel Group were largely ceremonial, though no one seemed willing to acknowledge this obvious truth. She attended industry galas in gowns that cost more than most people's monthly salaries, her presence at these events documented extensively in hospitality trade publications. She charmed potential investors with perfectly rehearsed stories over 18-hole golf games at exclusive clubs, her handicap more fiction than fact, but her ability to make powerful men feel clever and important absolutely genuine. Most frustratingly, she took credit for acquisitions I had meticulously researched, negotiated, and structured, appearing at press conferences to announce deals while I remained behind the scenes, ensuring the legal framework would actually protect our interests. Rebecca brought in the Nantucket property, my father would tell board members, conveniently forgetting that I had spent 3 months conducting due diligence, discovered the environmental issues that nearly derailed the purchase, and restructured the entire financing arrangement to protect us from liability. Rebecca's contribution had been a single lunch meeting where she convinced the seller that Sterling Hotel Group was the right fit for his family legacy. Meanwhile, I worked 70-hour weeks as general counsel and chief operating officer, managing our legal affairs across 6 states, overseeing daily operations for 12 properties, ensuring regulatory compliance in an industry where a single violation could result in millions in fines, and serving as the unofficial translator between my father's old-school management style and the modern hospitality landscape. My desk was perpetually covered with contracts that needed review, operational reports that required analysis, and crisis management situations that demanded immediate attention. I had memorized the employee handbook for each property, knew the names and personal situations of our key managers, and could recite occupancy rates and revenue projections from memory. Your sister brings in the opportunities. My father, William, would remind me whenever I questioned the disparity in our roles or compensation, his voice carrying the weary patience of someone explaining something painfully obvious. People invest in relationships with Rebecca. She opens doors that talent alone can't access. That's equally valuable as what you do in the background. In the background. That phrase had become the soundtrack of my professional life, a constant reminder that no matter how essential my contributions, I would always be supporting cast in Rebecca's starring role. The irony was that Rebecca's charm offensive was becoming less effective as she aged. The hospitality industry was evolving, becoming more data-driven and operationally complex. The relationships she cultivated were increasingly with men who valued substance over style, who asked detailed questions she couldn't answer and expected follow-through she wasn't equipped to provide. I watched her struggle in meetings with our operations team, where discussions of supply chain management and labor cost optimization left her visibly uncomfortable. She had learned to deflect these conversations with humor and grace, but I could see the growing panic in her eyes when forced to engage with the technical realities of running a hotel empire. Victoria handles all those operational details, she would say with a dismissive wave, as if the details weren't the foundation upon which every successful hospitality business was built. I focus on the big picture, the strategic vision. But her strategic vision was increasingly disconnected from operational reality. She proposed partnerships that would have been financially disastrous, marketing campaigns that ignored our target demographics, and expansion plans that demonstrated a fundamental misunderstanding of our operational capacity. I found myself in the increasingly uncomfortable position of having to quietly sabotage my sister's ideas to protect the company, then watch our parents praise her innovation while treating my caution as lack of vision. The isolation was suffocating. I had few close friends outside the company. My work schedule made maintaining personal relationships nearly impossible, and fewer still who understood the peculiar dynamics of family business. The men I dated were either intimidated by my professional success or assumed I was somehow less committed to my career because it was a family company rather than a corporate climb. "You're so lucky to work for your family," a date had said just the previous month, his tone suggesting I was playing house rather than building a business empire. Must be nice not to have real pressure or competition. I had ended that relationship the same night, tired of explaining that family businesses often involved more pressure, not less, because every professional decision carried personal consequences and every personal relationship was filtered through professional hierarchies. My mother's weekly phone calls always included subtle reminders of my failures in the marriage market. The Morrison girl just got engaged, she would mention casually, to that nice investment banker from her father's firm. Second wedding this month for girls your age. As if my worth could be measured by my ability to secure an appropriate husband, as if my professional accomplishments were mere placeholders until I found my true calling as someone's wife and mother. I had stopped attending family social events years ago, tired of being introduced as our daughter who's so dedicated to the business, while Rebecca was simply our daughter Rebecca. The implication was always clear. One of us was fulfilling her proper role as an ornament to the family's social standing, while the other was indulging in an extended phase of misplaced priorities. The loneliness was perhaps the cruelest part of my position. I loved my family deeply, despite their blindness to my contributions. I loved the company that had shaped my entire adult life. I loved the challenge of building something meaningful, of creating employment for hundreds of people, of maintaining a legacy that meant something beyond mere profit. But I was desperately hungry for recognition, for acknowledgement, for someone to see the sacrifice and dedication I poured into Sterling Hotel Group every single day. I had no idea how completely that hunger would be exploited, or how close I would come to losing everything I had worked to build. The golden child's perfect match, everything changed when Rebecca announced her engagement to Harrison Blackstone III, though the changes began so subtly that I almost missed the tectonic shift occurring beneath our family's carefully maintained surface. The Blackstones weren't just wealthy. They represented a level of old money aristocracy that made even our family's considerable success seem quaint by comparison. Harrison's great-grandfather had founded Blackstone Capital Partners in the 1920s, building a financial empire that had survived the Depression, 2 world wars, and every economic crisis since through a combination of ruthless pragmatism and an almost supernatural ability to position themselves on the winning side of major economic shifts. Harrison himself was a study in inherited confidence. At 42, he possessed the kind of casual authority that came from never having to prove himself worthy of anything. His dark hair was perfectly styled in a way that suggested expensive maintenance masquerading as effortlessness, and his custom-tailored suits fit his athletic frame with the precision that only came from relationships with London's finest tailors. When he spoke, People listened, not because his ideas were particularly innovative, but because his family name carried the weight of 4 generations of successful wealth management. His private equity firm controlled a significant portfolio of hospitality and real estate investments nationwide, with total assets under management exceeding $3 billion. For the past 4 years, Sterling Hotel Group had maintained an exclusive advisory agreement with Blackstone Capital Partners, a relationship that had proven mutually beneficial and highly lucrative. They provided access to their extensive network of high-net-worth investors and development opportunities, while we offered operational expertise and management services for their hospitality investments. I had personally structured the most recent contract renewal 18 months earlier, spending countless hours negotiating terms that protected our operational independence while providing us access to their capital and connections. The agreement was worth millions in consulting fees annually and had opened doors to acquisition opportunities we never could have accessed independently. Isn't it wonderful? My mother gushed when Rebecca and Harrison announced their engagement during what was supposed to be a routine quarterly board meeting, her voice rising with an excitement that seemed to fill the entire conference room. The two families merging like this, it's like a fairy tale, but also a perfect strategic alliance. I nodded politely while that familiar knot of unease formed in my stomach, the same feeling I got when reviewing contracts that looked too good to be true. There was something about the timing of this engagement, the way it coincided with our contract renewal negotiations, that triggered my professional instincts for caution. "We'll need to expand your social responsibilities, Victoria," my mother continued after the formal meeting had concluded and the board members had offered their congratulations, her tone carrying the authority of someone who had never doubted her right to manage other people's lives. "Now that we'll be connected to the Blackstones, you can't keep hiding behind legal briefs and operational reports. Maybe you'll finally meet someone suitable at their social events." At 35 and determinedly single, I had become a source of constant maternal anxiety. My unmarried status was treated as a character flaw that required regular intervention, mentioned during every conversation lasting longer than 10 minutes, analyzed and dissected as if my professional fulfillment were somehow incomplete without romantic validation. "I'm not hiding, Mother," I replied, struggling to keep the edge of frustration from my voice, while simultaneously calculating how this engagement might affect our business relationship with Blackstone Capital. "I'm running operations for a 12-property hotel chain. Someone has to ensure we maintain our reputation for excellence and our commitment to profitability. Well, with the Blackstone connection, perhaps you won't need to work quite so intensively," she said, patting my cheek with a gesture that managed to be both affectionate and dismissive. "Rebecca really has secured everyone's future with this match. We should all be grateful." That phrase, "secured everyone's future," would echo in my mind for weeks afterward. There was something proprietary about the way she said it, as if Rebecca's romantic success had somehow purchased benefits for all of us, as if we were all now beholden to her fairy tale ending. That night, driving back to my penthouse apartment overlooking Boston Harbor in the BMW I had purchased with my own carefully saved money, I couldn't shake the feeling that fundamental shifts were occurring in our family power structure. The city lights reflected off the water like scattered diamonds. Beautiful, but somehow cold, much like the congratulatory smiles I had offered throughout the evening. I loved my sister despite her privileges and the unfair advantages she had always enjoyed. Rebecca wasn't malicious. She was simply accustomed to being the center of attention, to having doors open for her that remained locked for others, to receiving credit for successes she hadn't earned. In her mind, this was simply the natural order of things. But I sensed that this upcoming wedding would alter our family dynamics in ways none of us fully comprehended. There was something about Harrison's calculating gaze when he looked at our operations reports, something about the way he asked detailed questions about our management systems and profit margins. That suggested his interest in our family extended beyond romantic attraction to Rebecca. I had no idea how prescient that intuition would prove, or how completely unprepared I was for the systematic campaign of marginalization that was about to begin. The engagement celebration at the Blackstone family estate in the Hamptons became my first real glimpse into the world Rebecca was entering, and the world that was about to reshape our family's destiny in ways I couldn't have imagined. The estate itself was a testament to the kind of generational wealth that most people could only dream of. Situated on 27 acres of pristine waterfront property, the main house was a palatial Georgian colonial that had been featured in Architectural Digest twice in the past decade. Perfectly manicured gardens designed by the same firm that maintained the grounds at Versailles stretched toward private beaches where the Blackstone yacht, a 120-foot masterpiece that served as a floating embassy for their business entertaining, sat moored like a symbol of absolute luxury. I arrived alone, as always, wearing a sophisticated emerald silk dress I had invested considerable thought and expense in selecting for the occasion. The color complemented my dark hair and brought out the green flecks in my brown eyes, and the cut suggested understated elegance rather than desperate attention-seeking. I had even hired a stylist, a rare indulgence that felt necessary given the inevitable scrutiny I would face among the Blackstone social circle. The moment I stepped out of my car, which suddenly looked embarrassingly modest compared to the collection of Bentleys, Maseratis, and Teslas in the circular drive, I felt the weight of evaluation from the other guests. These were people accustomed to measuring worth through external indicators, the right clothes, the right jewelry, the right companion on your arm, and I was arriving alone in a dress that, while expensive by my standards, was probably unremarkable by theirs. Harrison's mother, Vivian Blackstone, greeted me at the entrance with the kind of smile that suggested she was performing a social obligation rather than expressing genuine warmth. Vivian was a woman who had perfected the art of gracious hostess while simultaneously communicating subtle hierarchies through tone and gesture. "Victoria, darling," she said, air-kissing my cheeks in the European style she had adopted during her years living in London. "How refreshingly practical you look tonight." The comment landed like a perfectly aimed arrow. Refreshingly practical. Not elegant, not beautiful, not striking, practical. As if my appearance were a charming reminder that some people prioritized function over form, that not everyone had the luxury of being purely ornamental. Throughout that evening, I was consistently introduced with qualifiers that diminished my actual role at Sterling Hotel Group. "This is Rebecca's sister who handles the legal work," Harrison's college roommate said to his investment banker friends, as if 8 years of strategic leadership could be summarized as clerical support. Each time I politely corrected my title, "Actually, I'm the COO and general counsel," and outlined my responsibilities. I watched eyes glaze over before conversations quickly pivoted to wedding planning details or Blackstone Capital's latest acquisition targets. My professional accomplishments were treated as an amusing quirk rather than evidence of competence and leadership. The women at the party were a particularly challenging audience. Most were wives or daughters of Harrison's business associates, women who had perfected the art of social climbing and viewed career success in other women with a mixture of confusion and mild disapproval. They spoke fluently about charity committees and private school admissions processes, but seemed genuinely perplexed by my dedication to something as mundane as running a business. "How do you manage to balance everything?" one asked with a kind of curiosity usually reserved for exotic animals. "Working such long hours must make it difficult to maintain a social life or find time for a relationship." Another chimed in with false sympathy. "It's so admirable how dedicated you are to your family's little hotel business. Though I imagine it must be exhausting, dealing with all those operational details. When do you find time for yourself?" Little hotel business. As if Sterling Hotel Group were a quaint bed and breakfast operation rather than a hospitality empire worth over $200 million. During a brief escape to the terrace for fresh air and emotional regrouping, I overheard a conversation that made my blood run cold and confirmed my growing suspicions about the true nature of this engagement. The Sterlings have solid fundamentals, but that small business mentality needs serious upgrading, Vivian was telling someone in her circle of confidants, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had never doubted her right to evaluate and critique others. Especially the younger sister, so fixated on operations and contracts. Poor thing. No vision for the bigger picture. She seems capable enough, another woman replied, though her tone suggested she was merely being polite. Capable, yes, but limited in scope. Small-minded, really. She can't see the forest for the trees. Vivian's laugh tinkled like expensive crystal. William Sterling is a lovely man, but he's been held back by conservative thinking. That daughter of his has reinforced all his worst instincts, focusing on operational efficiency instead of growth opportunities, protecting market share instead of expanding into new territories. I pressed myself closer to the French doors, desperate to hear more while praying I wouldn't be discovered eavesdropping. We'll modernize their approach. Naturally, Rebecca's voice joined the conversation with a confidence that sent ice through my veins. Harrison says their hotel chain has excellent bones, good properties in prime locations, solid reputation, loyal customer base. After the wedding, we can implement the improvements necessary to bring them into the 21st century. What kind of improvements? Someone asked. Streamlining operations, eliminating redundancies, bringing in professional management with experience in larger-scale hospitality operations. Rebecca spoke as if she were discussing routine maintenance rather than fundamental changes to the company I had spent years building and protecting. And your sister? There was a pause that felt like an eternity. Victoria has been invaluable in getting us to this point, but growth requires different skills than maintenance. We'll find an appropriate role for her in the new structure, something that utilizes her attention to detail without requiring the kind of strategic thinking she's not really equipped for. The casual cruelty of her assessment hit me like a physical blow. My own sister, discussing my professional future as if I were a loyal employee who had reached the limits of my capabilities rather than the person who had been instrumental in every major success Sterling Hotel Group had achieved over the past 8 years. I retreated back inside before they could discover me, telling myself they were simply being elitist and that their comments didn't indicate any concrete threat to my position. After all, Rebecca didn't have the authority to restructure Sterling Hotel Group's operations, and our father would never allow outsiders to dictate company policy. Or so I desperately hoped. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of forced smiles and surface-level conversations. I watched Rebecca glow with happiness as she showed off her engagement ring, a flawless 5-carat diamond that probably cost more than most people's houses, and accepted congratulations from guests who treated her as if she had achieved something remarkable simply by securing Harrison's interest. Harrison himself was charming in that practiced way of men who had never had to work for approval. He moved through the crowd with easy confidence, equally comfortable discussing market trends with the men and complimenting the women on their appearance, with just the right balance of appreciation and respectful distance. When he spoke to me, his tone was politely condescending, as if he were humoring a child who had wandered into an adult conversation. "Rebecca tells me you're quite the legal expert," he said during one of our brief interactions, his smile suggesting he found this amusing rather than impressive. It must be satisfying to have such a clear understanding of all those contracts and regulations. The way he said all those contracts and regulations made it sound like I spent my days organizing someone's filing system rather than structuring multi-million-dollar agreements and ensuring compliance across multiple jurisdictions. "Someone has to understand the legal framework that protects our business interests," I replied, keeping my tone professional despite my growing irritation. The hospitality industry is heavily regulated, and a single compliance failure can result in significant financial and reputational damage. Of course. Though I imagine that with the right strategic partnerships, some of that burden could be distributed among specialists who handle these things at scale. I didn't understand what he meant at the time, but his words would take on ominous significance in the months to come. As the evening concluded and I prepared to drive back to Boston, Rebecca pulled me aside for what I assumed would be a sisterly moment of connection. "Thank you for coming tonight, Vic," she said, using the childhood nickname that usually signaled affection. "I know these events aren't really your thing, but it means a lot to have family support." "Of course! I'm happy you found someone who makes you so obviously happy." She glowed at the comment, her joy so radiant that I almost managed to forget the conversation I had overheard on the terrace. Harrison is amazing, isn't he? And the opportunities this opens up for all of us. It's like a fairy tale, but better because it's real and it's going to change everything. Change everything. The phrase lingered in my mind during the long drive home, mixing with Vivian's dismissive assessment of my capabilities and Rebecca's casual discussion of my professional limitations. I had walked into that party as the COO of Sterling Hotel Group, a successful executive with a proven track record of strategic leadership and operational excellence. I left feeling like an imposter who had somehow fooled everyone into thinking she belonged in the same room as people who possessed real power and influence. For the first time in my professional life, I began to question whether my contributions to our family business were as valuable as I had believed, whether my role was as secure as I had assumed, whether the respect I thought I had earned was actually just tolerance for someone's quirky obsession with operational details. The doubt was toxic and consuming, but it would prove to be the first crack in my confidence, a crack that others were about to exploit with devastating effectiveness. The 8 months leading up to Rebecca and Harrison's wedding became a masterclass in subtle professional assassination, executed with such skill that I almost convinced myself I was imagining the growing pattern of exclusion and diminishment. What began as exciting family news quickly devolved into a series of calculated slights that I initially tried to rationalize as coincidence, as the natural chaos that surrounds major family events, as my own oversensitivity to perceived slights. It started with small things that seemed insignificant in isolation, but formed a disturbing pattern when viewed collectively. Meetings were scheduled without including me, then I would discover days later that major decisions had been made about company operations that fell directly under my purview. When I raised concerns about being excluded from these discussions, the responses were always smoothly dismissive. "Oh, Victoria, I'm so sorry. It was just a quick conversation about general strategic direction," my father would say, his tone suggesting I was being unnecessarily particular about protocol. Nothing concrete was decided. We just wanted Rebecca to get more involved in the big picture planning. "It slipped my mind to invite you," Rebecca would add with a bright smile that didn't reach her eyes. Harrison had some questions about our expansion timeline, but really it was more of a casual chat than a formal planning session. But I could see the evidence of their casual chats in revised operational plans that appeared on my desk without explanation, in budget adjustments that had been implemented without my review, in staffing decisions that contradicted months of careful planning I had undertaken with our human resources team. The engagement celebration at the Blackstone family estate had been my first real glimpse into this new dynamic. But it was hardly the last. Over the following months, I was consistently introduced at industry events as Rebecca's sister who handles the legal work, despite being the COO of a company that was rapidly becoming a significant player in luxury hospitality. At the Metropolitan Hospitality Awards dinner in New York, where Sterling Hotel Group was being honored for our sustainability initiatives, a program I had developed and implemented over 2 years. Rebecca accepted the award, while I sat at a table with spouses and guests rather than with company leadership. During her acceptance speech, she spoke eloquently about our team's commitment to environmental responsibility and the visionary leadership that makes initiatives like this possible, never once mentioning that I had personally researched sustainable practices, negotiated partnerships with environmental consultants, and overseen the implementation across all 12 properties. The industry publication that covered the event featured a photo of Rebecca holding the award, with a caption that read, "Rebecca Sterling, VP of Strategic Development, accepts Sustainability Award on behalf of Sterling Hotel Group." I wasn't mentioned in the article, despite being the architect of the entire program. When I raised this with my father, his response was a masterpiece of gaslighting disguised as fatherly wisdom. "Victoria, you know these industry publications focus on the executive level," he said with the patient tone he usually reserved for explaining obvious concepts. Rebecca represented the company beautifully. The important thing is that Sterling Hotel Group received recognition for excellent work that couldn't have happened without everyone's contributions. Everyone's contributions. as if my 2 years of dedicated effort were equivalent to Rebecca's 5-minute acceptance speech. The wedding planning process became another avenue for subtle exclusion and diminishment. While I wasn't invited to be in the bridal party, we're keeping it intimate, just Harrison's sister and my closest sorority friends, Rebecca explained. I was expected to be available for various planning activities and family obligations related to the celebration. What I discovered was that my availability was requested primarily when problems needed solving or tedious tasks required attention, never when actual decision-making was occurring or when enjoyable activities were being planned. I was asked to research and contact venues for the rehearsal dinner, which took 8 hours of detailed analysis and phone calls, then excluded from the actual venue selection meeting where Rebecca, my mother, and Vivian Blackstone made the final decision over lunch at their favorite country club. I was requested to review the catering contracts for legal compliance and negotiation opportunities, which saved the family approximately $15,000 in revised terms. But I wasn't invited to the tasting event where the final menu selections were made. Most painfully, I was assigned to coordinate with various vendors about timeline and logistics, photographers, florists, transportation coordinators, musicians, essentially serving as an unpaid wedding planning assistant while being excluded from conversations about the vision and overall aesthetic of the celebration. Victoria is so good at managing details, my mother would say when explaining why I wasn't participating in the more enjoyable aspects of wedding preparation. She has such an organized mind, perfect for ensuring everything runs smoothly. The subtext was always clear. I was useful for behind-the-scenes work, but not sophisticated enough for the creative and social aspects of planning a high-profile society wedding. My role was increasingly being defined as support staff rather than family member, helper rather than equal participant in what should have been a joyful family celebration. During this period, I also began noticing changes in how our business relationship with Blackstone Capital was evolving. Harrison started attending our quarterly board meetings as an observer, ostensibly to better understand Sterling Hotel Group's operations in preparation for the family connection his marriage would create. But his questions during these meetings were remarkably detailed and probing, focusing on operational efficiency, profit margins, management structure, and growth potential in ways that seemed more like due diligence than casual interest. "I'm curious about your management fees for the Nantucket property," he would ask, consulting notes that suggested extensive preparation. "The margins seem lower than industry standards for comparable luxury properties. Have you considered restructuring the operational model?" When I explained the reasoning behind our fee structure, which prioritized long-term customer satisfaction and employee retention over short-term profit maximization, he would nod politely while making additional notes that he never shared with the rest of us. "Interesting approach," he would say. "Very traditional. I imagine there are opportunities for optimization that might increase profitability without compromising quality." These conversations always made me uncomfortable, though I couldn't articulate exactly why. There was something predatory about Harrison's interest in our operational details, something that reminded me of investors who were evaluating acquisition targets rather than family members trying to understand a new business connection. I began keeping more detailed notes about these meetings, documenting Harrison's questions and the information he seemed most interested in obtaining. I told myself it was routine thoroughness, but some instinct was warning me that this information might become important later. Meanwhile, Rebecca was becoming increasingly unavailable for routine company business. Our monthly sister lunches, a tradition we'd maintained even during our busiest periods, started being canceled with increasing frequency. "I'm so sorry, Vic, but Harrison's mother wants to introduce me to some of her charity committee friends," she would say, her tone suggesting this was an opportunity one couldn't possibly understand the importance of. Rain check. "The Blackstones invited me to join them for a weekend in Martha's Vineyard," she explained during another cancellation. "Harrison thinks it's important for me to build relationships with their social circle before the wedding. You understand, right?" I did understand, perhaps more clearly than Rebecca intended. She was being absorbed into a world where I had no place, where my practical skills and professional achievements were irrelevant, where value was measured by social connections and family pedigree rather than competence and dedication. The most telling incident occurred during our annual family retreat to my father's cabin in Vermont, a tradition that had been sacred in our family for over 20 years. This year, Rebecca announced she wouldn't be able to attend because Harrison's family had planned a ski trip to Aspen during the same weekend. "Can you reschedule with the Blackstones?" I asked, genuinely hurt that she would abandon a longtime family tradition. Dad's been looking forward to this retreat all year, especially with everything that's been going on with the wedding planning. "Victoria, be reasonable," she replied with a patience that felt patronizing. "The Blackstones planned this months ago. Their entire extended family will be there, cousins from London, Harrison's grandparents from Palm Beach. This isn't something I can just skip. And our family tradition is something you can skip? Don't be dramatic. We can do the Vermont thing another time. This is important for building relationships that will benefit all of us in the long run. All of us." Once again, Rebecca's personal choices were being framed as strategic decisions that would somehow benefit the entire family, as if her integration into the Blackstone social circle would create advantages that the rest of us should be grateful for. That weekend in Vermont, sitting around the fireplace with just my parents, the absence of Rebecca's laughter and energy was palpable. My father seemed older, more tired, and I caught him staring at Rebecca's empty chair with an expression of loss that broke my heart. "She's building her own life," my mother said when she noticed my father's melancholy. "That's what daughters are supposed to do. We should be proud that she's found such an advantageous match." But there was something hollow in her voice, a note of uncertainty that suggested even she was beginning to sense that we were losing Rebecca to forces beyond our understanding or control. The isolation I felt during that weekend was suffocating. Here I was, surrounded by family, yet feeling more alone than I had in years. Every conversation seemed to circle back to Rebecca's absence, to speculation about her new life, to half-hearted reassurances that everything would return to normal after the wedding. I found myself taking long walks through the Vermont woods, trying to process the growing certainty that fundamental changes were coming to our family, changes that I was powerless to prevent and apparently destined to endure rather than shape. It was during one of these solitary walks, surrounded by towering pines and the crystalline silence of early winter, that I finally admitted to myself what I had been trying to deny. I was scared. Scared of losing my position at Sterling Hotel Group, scared of watching my family's loyalty shift toward the Blackstones, scared of becoming irrelevant in the very places where I had always found my identity and purpose. The fear was paralyzing and energizing at the same time. For the first time in my life, I began to consider what I would do if my worst suspicions proved correct, if my role at Sterling Hotel Group was indeed being systematically undermined in preparation for some larger restructuring. I had always been the responsible one, the one who solved problems rather than creating them. But as I walked through those ancient woods, I began to wonder if responsibility might require me to become more proactive in protecting my interests, even if that meant challenging family members who had always taken my loyalty for granted. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. For 35 years, I had been the dutiful daughter, the reliable sister, the competent employee. What would happen if I decided to become something else entirely? The wedding dress shopping expedition became a crystallizing moment in my understanding of exactly how my role in this family celebration had been defined, and how little regard my sister and mother had for my feelings in the process. Although I hadn't been invited to be in the bridal party, a decision that still stung despite Rebecca's explanation that they were keeping it intimate, my mother insisted I accompany them to witness Rebecca trying on gowns at Vera Wong's flagship Manhattan boutique. "You simply must be there," she said when I attempted to decline, claiming pressing work obligations that would have been legitimate excuses in any other context. "This is a once-in-a-lifetime moment for your sister. Family should be present for these milestones." The irony wasn't lost on me that my presence was essential for wedding dress selection, but unnecessary for the actual bridal party, as if witnessing was an appropriate substitute for participating. I rearranged 2 important depositions and a critical contract negotiation to clear my schedule, then met them at the exclusive salon on Madison Avenue. The boutique itself was intimidating, all-white marble, crystal chandeliers, and intimidatingly elegant salespeople who seemed to evaluate your net worth before offering assistance. Rebecca's bridal entourage consisted of Harrison's sister Charlotte, a perfectly coiffed investment banker who spoke in Harvard Business School buzzwords, and three of Rebecca's sorority sisters from college. Women I had met periodically over the years who had always treated me with a kind of polite condescension reserved for people who weren't part of their inner circle. I found myself relegated to a velvet settee in the corner of the showroom, positioned like an audience member rather than a participant in the experience. The other women clustered around Rebecca, offering opinions and squealing with delight at each gown she modeled, while I sat awkwardly in my tailored business suit, having come directly from a morning meeting, feeling distinctly out of place among the feminine rituals unfolding before me. I just admire working women who don't have time for fashion, one of Rebecca's sorority friends commented, her tone dripping with false sympathy as she eyed my practical outfit. So brave to prioritize function over form. Not everyone can pull off that professional look. The comment was designed to sting, and it succeeded. Here I was, having rearranged my entire day to support my sister, and I was being criticized for looking like someone who actually worked for a living rather than someone whose primary occupation was maintaining an ornamental appearance. Victoria's always been more focused on her career than her wardrobe. My mother chimed in with a laugh that felt like a small betrayal. We keep telling her that presentation matters, especially in the hospitality industry, but she insists on prioritizing substance over style. The implication was clear. My lack of fashion consciousness was a character flaw that needed correction, evidence of misplaced priorities that my family found both amusing and mildly embarrassing. As Rebecca modeled dress after dress, each more elaborate and expensive than the last, the conversation among her friends became increasingly pointed in its exclusion of me from their shared world of references and experiences. They discussed upcoming charity galas they would all attend together, vacation plans to exclusive resorts where they would reconnect after the wedding, mutual friends who were also planning elaborate society weddings that would provide future opportunities for their group to reunite and celebrate. I realized I wasn't just excluded from Rebecca's bridal party, I was being systematically excluded from her entire social world, treated as a family obligation who needed to be occasionally acknowledged but never truly included. The moment that broke my heart completely occurred when Rebecca emerged from the dressing room in what would eventually become her chosen gown, a breathtaking Vera Wang creation with hand-beaded details and a cathedral train that transformed her into something ethereal and princess-like. The room fell silent with genuine awe, and for a moment, I forgot my hurt feelings and felt nothing but pure joy for my sister's happiness. She looked absolutely radiant, glowing with the kind of beauty that transcended fashion and entered the realm of pure joy. "Rebecca, you look perfect," I said softly, my voice catching with emotion. "Absolutely perfect." She turned to look at me in the mirror, and for just an instant, I saw something that looked like gratitude and sisterly connection in her eyes. Then Charlotte broke the moment. "The dress is stunning, but we need to think about the overall aesthetic," she said with the authority of someone who had planned multiple society weddings. "The color palette, the venue, the photographic opportunities. This needs to complement the Blackstone family's expectations for the event's coverage." "Event coverage?" I asked, confused. "Town and Country is doing a feature spread?" one of the sorority friends explained with obvious excitement. "The wedding is going to be featured as one of the season's most important society events. The photographer needs everything to coordinate perfectly." I watched Rebecca nod enthusiastically, clearly thrilled by the prospect of her wedding being featured in a prestigious lifestyle magazine. The joy I had felt about her happiness curdled into something more complex, as I realized that even her wedding had become a performance for an audience of strangers, rather than an intimate celebration of love and commitment. "Will the feature include family background?" I asked, curious despite myself, about whether Sterling Hotel Group would be mentioned in the context of this society coverage. "Oh yes," Charlotte replied with the confidence of someone who understood how these things worked. "They'll focus on the business connection between our families, the merger of two hospitality empires, that sort of thing. Very strategic positioning for both companies. Merger of two hospitality empires. The phrase landed like a physical blow. I looked at Rebecca sharply, searching her expression for some sign that she found this description as alarming as I did. But she was preening in the mirror, lost in her own reflection and the fantasy of being featured as a society bride. "What merger?" I asked carefully, trying to keep my voice neutral despite the alarm bells ringing in my head. "Oh, Charlotte waved dismissively. "The natural evolution when two business families unite through marriage. Combining resources, expanding market reach, optimizing operational efficiency. Harrison has such vision for growth opportunities." The casual way she discussed what sounded like concrete business plans involving our family company sent ice through my veins. This wasn't speculation about general future possibilities. This sounded like discussion of specific strategies that had already been developed and were simply awaiting implementation. I caught my mother's eye in the mirror, looking for some sign that she was equally concerned by this casual mention of merger plans. But she was focused entirely on Rebecca's appearance, adjusting the train and commenting on how the dress would photograph. "The beadwork catches the light beautifully," my mother was saying. "You'll look luminous in the ceremony photos, and the train will be spectacular for the formal portraits afterward." As the afternoon progressed, I found myself increasingly isolated from the excitement and joy that should have characterized this milestone moment. Every conversation seemed to revolve around social positioning, photographic opportunities, and business advantages, rather than love, commitment, or family celebration. When Rebecca finally made her decision and selected the Vera Wang gown, at a price that probably exceeded most people's annual salaries, the group moved on to discussing accessories, hairstyling, and makeup consultations. I was included in these discussions only when my opinion was needed to resolve some logistical detail or when someone needed information about family preferences that I might possess. "Victoria, does your father have any strong feelings about wedding photography?" Charlotte asked at one point. "We want to ensure the family portraits will meet everyone's expectations." The question was practical and necessary, but the way it was phrased, as if I were a helpful resource for gathering family information rather than a family member with my own stake in how these portraits would be composed, reinforced my growing sense of being treated as staff rather than family. As we prepared to leave the boutique, Rebecca pulled me aside for what I hoped would be a moment of genuine sisterly connection. "Thank you for being here today, Vic," she said, and I could hear real warmth in her voice. "I know this isn't really your kind of thing, but it means a lot to have your support." "Of course," I replied, genuinely wanting to bridge the growing distance between us. "You looked absolutely beautiful in that dress. Harrison is going to be speechless when he sees you." She glowed at the compliment, and for a moment it felt like we were just sisters again, connected by shared history and mutual affection, despite our very different approaches to life. Then she continued in a lower voice, as if sharing a confidence. "And I'm so excited about all the opportunities this is going to create for all of us. Harrison has incredible vision for expanding Sterling Hotel Group's reach. We're going to take the company to levels Dad never imagined possible." The warmth I had been feeling evaporated instantly. Even in what should have been a personal moment between sisters, Rebecca was focused on business opportunities and strategic advantages rather than the emotional significance of the commitment she was making. "What kind of expansion are you talking about?" I asked carefully. "Oh, growth strategies, market optimization, that sort of thing," she replied with the vague enthusiasm of someone who understood buzzwords, but not underlying business realities. "Harrison says our company has such potential that's never been fully realized. With the right strategic partnerships and operational restructuring, we could be a major player nationally." Operational restructuring. The phrase sent another chill through me, but before I could ask for clarification, my mother and the other women joined us, ready to continue their afternoon of wedding planning at the next appointment. As I watched them walk away together, chattering excitedly about flowers and musicians and seating arrangements, I felt a profound sense of isolation that had nothing to do with being excluded from their immediate plans and everything to do with being excluded from my sister's future. The drive back to Boston provided time to process what I had witnessed and overheard during the afternoon. The casual discussion of business mergers, the reference to operational restructuring, The assumption that Sterling Hotel Group would somehow be transformed through Rebecca's marriage. All of it pointed toward changes that no one had bothered to discuss with me despite my role as COO. That evening, I found myself reviewing our partnership agreement with Blackstone Capital with new eyes, looking for clauses or provisions that might have implications I hadn't previously considered. The contract was solid and protective of our interests, but it had been negotiated in a context where both parties were assumed to be acting in good faith toward mutually beneficial goals. What if that assumption was wrong? What if the Blackstones viewed our partnership as a stepping stone toward something more comprehensive and potentially threatening to Sterling Hotel Group's independence? For the first time since Rebecca's engagement announcement, I began to seriously consider the possibility that I was not being paranoid or oversensitive, but rather that I was witnessing the early stages of a carefully orchestrated plan that would fundamentally alter our family business, possibly in ways that would eliminate my role entirely. The thought was terrifying, but it was also clarifying. If my suspicions were correct, then my family loyalty was being exploited by people who had no intention of reciprocating that loyalty when it came to protecting my interests or preserving my position. I had always been the responsible one, the one who put family harmony ahead of personal advancement. But as I sat in my apartment that evening, reviewing contracts and thinking about casual references to operational restructuring, I began to wonder if responsibility might require me to start protecting myself rather than assuming others would do so. The realization felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. Everything I had believed about my place in this family, this company, this carefully constructed life, was suddenly subject to question. And for the first time in my adult life, I wasn't sure I could count on the people I loved most to protect my interests when protecting those interests conflicted with their own ambitions. The final months before the wedding brought a series of incidents that, when viewed in isolation, might have seemed like normal family stress or wedding-related chaos. But together, they formed a pattern so unmistakable that I could no longer pretend to ignore what was happening to my position within both the family and the company. The first major warning came during what was supposed to be a routine quarterly review meeting with our board of directors. These meetings were typically collaborative affairs where we discussed operational performance, reviewed financial projections, and aligned on strategic priorities for the coming quarter. Harrison attended as an observer, as he had for the past several months. But this time, he came prepared with a detailed presentation about optimization opportunities that he wanted to share with the board. My father had apparently approved this addition to the agenda without mentioning it to me, despite the fact that operational optimization fell directly under my purview as COO. I've been studying Sterling Hotel Group's operational model with great interest. Harrison began, clicking through professionally prepared slides that must have taken considerable time and resources to develop. And I've identified several areas where strategic restructuring could significantly improve profit margins without compromising service quality. As he spoke, I felt my face flush with a combination of embarrassment and anger. These were recommendations about my area of responsibility, presented to our board without any prior consultation with me, based on analysis I hadn't been included in or even informed was taking place. His suggestions were not without merit. Harrison clearly understood hospitality operations at a sophisticated level, but they revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of Sterling Hotel Group's business model and values. He focused exclusively on short-term profit maximization without considering the long-term customer relationships and employee loyalty that formed the foundation of our success. For example, he continued, pointing to a chart showing staffing costs across our properties, your labor costs are approximately 15% higher than industry averages. This represents significant overhead that could be reduced through strategic workforce optimization. I finally spoke up, unable to remain silent while he advocated for policies that would undermine everything we had built. Those higher labor costs reflect our commitment to employee retention and satisfaction. Our turnover rates are among the lowest in the industry, which translates to better customer service and lower training costs over time. Harrison smiled at me with the patronizing patience of someone addressing a child who didn't understand adult conversations. That's certainly one perspective, Victoria. But in today's competitive environment, operational efficiency has to be the primary consideration. Sentiment is a luxury that successful businesses can't afford. Sentiment. He had just dismissed our carefully cultivated company culture, our reputation for employee satisfaction, and our philosophy of sustainable business practices as sentiment. I looked around the boardroom, expecting to see expressions of concern or disagreement from the board members who had watched Sterling Hotel Group thrive under our current operational model. Instead, I saw thoughtful nodding, as if Harrison's recommendations were revelations rather than challenges to our core values. "These are interesting ideas," said Eleanor Wright, one of our longest-serving board members. "Harrison, have you developed specific implementation timelines for these efficiency improvements?" "Actually, yes," Harrison replied, advancing to his next slide. "I've outlined a phased approach that could be implemented over 12 to 18 months, assuming proper leadership commitment and clear authority to make necessary changes." Clear authority to make necessary changes. The phrase sent ice through my veins. He was essentially proposing to strip away my operational authority and implement his vision of efficiency optimization, which would transform Sterling Hotel Group into a typical corporate hospitality operation focused on margins rather than values. After the meeting, I cornered my father in his office, needing to understand how this presentation had been approved without my knowledge or input. "Dad, why wasn't I informed that Harrison would be making operational recommendations to the board?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice professional despite my frustration. "These suggestions directly impact areas where I have primary responsibility." He asked to share some thoughts, and I saw no harm in listening, my father replied, his tone defensive. "Harrison has extensive experience with hospitality operations at a much larger scale than ours. His insights could be valuable." "His insights contradict the business model we've spent years developing," I pointed out. "The approach he's recommending would fundamentally change our company culture and our relationships with both employees and customers." "Change isn't necessarily bad, Victoria," my father said with a tired sigh that suggested this conversation was an unwelcome burden. "Maybe it's time to consider whether our traditional approaches are holding us back from greater success. Our traditional approaches have generated 40% profit growth over the past 5 years," I reminded him. "Why would we abandon strategies that are clearly working?" "Because 40% growth over 5 years might seem impressive to us, but it's modest compared to what's possible with proper strategic vision and operational optimization." The phrase proper strategic vision felt like a personal attack. I had been developing and implementing strategic vision for Sterling Hotel Group for 8 years, apparently without my father recognizing that what I was doing qualified as strategic thinking. "I'd like to review Harrison's analysis before any implementation decisions are made," I said firmly. "As COO, I should be involved in evaluating operational changes that would affect every aspect of our business." "Of course," my father agreed, but something in his tone suggested this involvement would be consultative rather than decision-making. "We'll make sure you have input into the process." Input into the process. Not authority over the process, not leadership of the process, input. The second major warning came 2 weeks later, during our annual strategic planning retreat. This had always been a working session where our senior management team spent 3 days reviewing performance, identifying challenges, and developing plans for the coming year. This year, Harrison was included as a full participant rather than an observer, and he arrived with his own prepared agenda that seemed designed to take control of the entire strategic planning process. "I'd like to propose a different structure for our discussions this year," he announced during the opening session. "Rather than reviewing past performance, I think we should focus on future opportunities and the organizational changes necessary to capitalize on those opportunities." Before I could object to this fundamental alteration of our established process, my father nodded approvingly. "That sounds like a forward-thinking approach. Victoria, you can present the operational review later, if time permits." If time permits, my comprehensive analysis of operational performance, employee satisfaction metrics, customer feedback trends, and efficiency improvements. Work I had spent weeks preparing had just been relegated to optional content that might be squeezed in if more important matters didn't consume all available time. Harrison's version of strategic planning focused almost entirely on growth through acquisition and operational consolidation. He presented detailed analyses of potential acquisition targets, financing strategies for rapid expansion, and organizational restructuring that would support much larger-scale operations. The hospitality industry is consolidating rapidly, he explained to the group, which now felt more like his audience than our management team. Independent operators like Sterling are increasingly vulnerable to being acquired by larger chains with superior operational efficiency and capital resources. I raised my hand, feeling like a student rather than the COO of the company we were discussing. But our independence is one of our competitive advantages. Customers choose Sterling Properties specifically because we offer personalized service and local character the chain operations can't match. That's a common misconception, Harrison replied with a condescending smile. Market research shows that modern travelers prioritize consistency and value over local character. Personalized service is expensive to maintain and difficult to scale. Our customer satisfaction scores and repeat booking rates suggest otherwise, I countered, citing statistics I knew by heart. We consistently outperform chain competitors on customer loyalty metrics. Loyalty metrics are less relevant than revenue per available room and operational profit margins, Harrison responded. In today's market, efficiency trumps sentiment every time. There was that word again, sentiment. Once again, Harrison was dismissing the values and relationships that formed the foundation of our success as irrelevant emotional attachments that had no place in serious business discussion. What disturbed me most was watching my colleagues, people I had worked with for years, people who had helped build Sterling Hotel Group's reputation for excellence, nodding along with Harrison's analysis as if our company culture and customer relationships were indeed obstacles to overcome rather than assets to protect. By the end of the 3-day retreat, Harrison had effectively taken control of our strategic planning process and gained approval for a preliminary exploration of acquisition opportunities and organizational restructuring options. My role had been reduced to providing operational data that would support his strategic initiatives rather than developing strategy myself. The final and most devastating warning came 3 weeks before the wedding. During what I thought would be a routine sister lunch that had been rescheduled multiple times due to Rebecca's increasingly busy social calendar. We met at her favorite restaurant in Back Bay, a trendy spot where she was greeted by name and seated at a prominent table that showcased her presence to other diners. Rebecca looked radiant, glowing with the happiness of someone whose life was unfolding exactly as she had always dreamed. "I'm so excited, Vic," she said after we had ordered, her enthusiasm infectious, despite my growing concerns about the business implications of her marriage. This wedding is going to be absolutely perfect, but more than that, the future Harrison and I are planning together is going to be incredible. Tell me about that future, I said carefully, hoping for some reassurance that my concerns were unfounded. Well, obviously there will be changes at Sterling after we're married, she began, and my heart sank at her casual confirmation of my worst fears. Harrison has such amazing vision for growth and expansion. He's shown me projections that would make Sterling a major player in the hospitality industry within 5 years. What kind of changes are you talking about? I asked, though I was beginning to suspect I already knew the answer. Organizational restructuring, operational optimization, strategic partnerships, all the things that will take us to the next level. She replied with the confident enthusiasm of someone who had memorized impressive-sounding phrases without necessarily understanding their implications. And where do I fit into this restructured organization? I asked directly, no longer willing to dance around the central question. Rebecca's expression shifted slightly, becoming more guarded. Well, there'll need to be some adjustments to leadership roles, obviously. Harrison's team has experience with much larger operations, so they'll need to take primary responsibility for implementing the growth strategy. Harrison's team? What happened to Sterling Hotel Group's existing leadership? Victoria, don't be dramatic, she said with a laugh that sounded forced. No one's suggesting that existing leadership isn't valuable. But growth requires different skills than maintenance. And Harrison's people have proven track records with the kind of expansion we're planning. Maintenance. She had just characterized 8 years of strategic leadership, operational innovation, and profit growth as maintenance, as if I had been nothing more than a caretaker, keeping things running until real leaders could take control. So what role would I have in this new structure? I pressed, needing to hear her say it explicitly. There would definitely be a place for you, she replied quickly. Too quickly. In the tone of someone delivering prepared talking points. Harrison thinks your legal expertise and operational knowledge would be extremely valuable in a consulting capacity. You could focus on the technical aspects that you're so good at without the stress of day-to-day management responsibilities. A consulting capacity. Technical aspects without the stress of day-to-day management responsibilities. Every phrase was a euphemism for professional demotion, for being pushed aside to make room for Harrison's vision of efficient operations. Rebecca, what you're describing isn't restructuring, I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil in my chest. It's replacement. You're talking about replacing Sterling Hotel Group's existing leadership with Harrison's people and reducing my role from COO to part-time consultant. That's not how I'd characterize it, she protested, but her eyes wouldn't meet mine. It's evolution. It's growth. It's taking advantage of incredible opportunities that we could never access independently. We've been growing at 40% annually for 5 years, I reminded her. We don't need to be rescued from our success. Victoria, you're thinking too small, she said, her tone becoming more animated and slightly desperate. Harrison is talking about national expansion, about becoming a major brand, about building something really significant instead of just managing a collection of boutique properties. Those boutique properties employ over 800 people and generate over $200 million in annual revenue, I pointed out. That seems fairly significant already. But it could be so much more, she insisted. With the right strategic vision and proper operational efficiency, we could be generating $2 billion in revenue within 5 years. There were those phrases again, strategic vision and operational efficiency, being used to justify dismantling everything we had built in favor of Harrison's version of success. And if I'm not comfortable with this evolution, I asked, if I think our current approach is working and doesn't need to be fundamentally altered. Rebecca's smile faltered for just a moment, and in that pause, I saw something that looked almost like pity. Victoria, sometimes you have to trust that other people can see opportunities that you might miss because you're too close to the day-to-day operations. Harrison has an outside perspective that could be incredibly valuable. So my perspective, after 8 years of building this company, is too limited to be trusted? That's not what I'm saying, she replied quickly, but we both knew it was exactly what she was saying. I'm saying that sometimes fresh eyes can see possibilities that we've been too comfortable to recognize. The conversation continued for another 30 minutes, but the essential message had been delivered with crystal clarity. Rebecca and Harrison had developed comprehensive plans for transforming Sterling Hotel Group, plans that involved systematically replacing our existing leadership with Harrison's team and reducing my role to that of a technical consultant with no real authority or decision-making power. What made the betrayal even more devastating was Rebecca's obvious belief that she was offering me a gift, an opportunity to be part of something bigger and more successful than what I had helped create. In her mind, I should be grateful for the chance to contribute to their grand vision, even if that contribution involved accepting a dramatically diminished role. As I drove back to the office after that lunch, I felt something shift inside me, a fundamental change in how I viewed my relationship with my family and my position at Sterling Hotel Group. For 35 years, I had been the dutiful daughter and loyal sister, putting family harmony ahead of personal advancement, trusting that my contributions would be recognized and valued. That trust had been systematically exploited and betrayed. My own family was preparing to sacrifice my professional future for what they perceived as a better opportunity, and they expected me to cooperate gracefully with my own marginalization. The realization was devastating, but it was also clarifying. I had been fighting a shadow war, trying to defend against threats I couldn't name and challenges I wasn't allowed to acknowledge directly. Now I knew exactly what I was facing, and I could finally stop pretending that family loyalty would protect me from family betrayal. That evening, I did something I had never done before. I began developing a strategy to protect my own interests, regardless of how that strategy might affect other people's plans for my future. 2 weeks before Rebecca's wedding, I made a discovery that changed everything I thought I knew about my family's loyalty and Harrison's true intentions for Sterling Hotel Group. It happened entirely by accident, during what should have been routine preparation for a board meeting where we would be reviewing the quarterly financial reports. I had arrived early at our headquarters building, as was my habit, to ensure all the documents were properly organized and to review any last-minute issues that might arise during the meeting. Our conference room's presentation system had been upgraded recently, and the new smart screen occasionally displayed recently accessed documents from our network server when connecting to laptops. Usually, this was just a minor annoyance. Someone's PowerPoint slides would briefly appear before the intended presentation loaded, but that morning, it revealed something that made my blood run cold. When I connected my laptop to begin uploading the quarterly reports, the screen flickered and displayed a document titled Sterling Hotel Group Acquisition Integration Timeline, Confidential. Before I could even process what I was seeing, the document disappeared as my presentation loaded, but those few seconds were enough to see that this wasn't a theoretical planning exercise. This was a detailed implementation plan for acquiring Sterling Hotel Group, complete with timelines, budget allocations, and organizational restructuring charts that showed exactly how our existing leadership would be systematically replaced. My hands were shaking as I tried to figure out how to access that document. It had clearly been stored on our network server, which meant someone with authorized access had been working on acquisition plans using our own company resources. The implications were staggering and infuriating. After 20 minutes of careful searching through our shared directories, trying to look casual in case anyone entered the conference room, I found the folder buried deep in a section typically used for strategic planning documents. The folder was labeled BCP Integration Planning and contained over 30 files that detailed every aspect of a planned acquisition. What I discovered in those files was a masterpiece of strategic manipulation that had been in development for over 18 months, long before Rebecca's engagement had even been announced. The acquisition plan was comprehensive and ruthless. Blackstone Capital Partners intended to purchase Sterling Hotel Group through a complex transaction that would be structured as a strategic merger, but would result in complete Blackstone control of our operations, our properties, and our management decisions. The timeline showed the acquisition occurring in 3 phases. Phase 1 had already been implemented. It involved Harrison integrating himself into Sterling Hotel Group's strategic planning process, gaining detailed knowledge of our operations, finances, and organizational structure while systematically undermining confidence in our existing leadership. Phase 2 was scheduled to begin immediately after the wedding. It involved Harrison assuming formal advisory roles that would give him increasing authority over strategic decisions while our family remained nominally in control. Phase 3 would be the formal acquisition, structured to look like a voluntary merger that would benefit both families, but would result in Blackstone Capital Partners owning Sterling Hotel Group outright, while my family received what amounted to consulting roles in their own former company. The financial projections were even more infuriating. Harrison's team had calculated that Sterling Hotel Group was worth approximately $180 million, based on our current operations and asset values. But they had also projected that with operational optimization and strategic restructuring, their euphemisms for mass layoffs and cost-cutting, they could increase the company's value to over $300 million within 2 years. They were planning to buy our family's life work for $180 million, fire half our employees, eliminate the customer service standards that had taken us years to develop, and then sell the restructured company for nearly double their investment. But the most devastating discovery was a series of internal memos between Harrison and his team discussing the Sterling family management situation. These documents revealed the true extent of their manipulation and their complete disregard for anyone whose interests didn't align with their profit projections. One memo, dated 3 months earlier, discussed my role specifically. Victoria Sterling's operational expertise will be valuable during the transition period, but her attachment to current staffing levels and service standards makes her unsuitable for long-term leadership. Recommend retaining her services as legal counsel during integration phase, then transitioning her to part-time consulting role. Her emotional investment in existing operational model could create resistance to necessary efficiency improvements. Blech. Another memo discussed my father's potential reactions. William Sterling's age and traditional management style suggest he will welcome reduced operational responsibilities. Position acquisition as opportunity for semi-retirement while maintaining family legacy through strategic partnership. Emphasize financial security and reduced day-to-day stress as primary benefits. The most chilling memo focused on Rebecca. Rebecca Sterling's enthusiasm for strategic expansion and social advancement aligns perfectly with acquisition objectives. Her influence over family decision-making process makes her our most valuable asset in securing cooperation during transition. Her limited operational knowledge ensures she won't recognize problematic aspects of restructuring plan until implementation is too advanced to reverse. They were using my sister as an unwitting accomplice in their plan to steal our family company, exploiting her social ambitions and her desire to be part of something bigger than what we had already built. As I sat in that conference room, surrounded by documents that detailed the systematic betrayal of everything I had worked to build, I felt something I had never experienced before. A cold, crystalline rage that burned away every trace of family loyalty and dutiful compliance. For 18 months, while I had been trusting Harrison's integration into our family and our business, he had been methodically planning to steal everything we had created. While I had been worrying about being excluded from wedding planning activities, he had been developing strategies to exclude me from my own company's future. The wedding wasn't a celebration of love and commitment. It was the final phase of a corporate takeover disguised as a family celebration. I photographed every single document in that folder with my phone, creating a complete record of their plans, their financial projections, their timeline, and their assessments of how to manipulate each member of my family. Then I carefully closed the folder and returned to preparing for the board meeting as if nothing had happened. But everything had changed. I finally understood the game that was being played, and I realized that I had been operating under completely false assumptions about the rules, the objectives, and the other players' true intentions. Harrison had been treating our family interactions as strategic business negotiations, while I had been treating them as family relationships. He had been developing acquisition strategies, while I had been trying to maintain family harmony. He had been planning to eliminate my role, while I had been worried about hurt feelings and social dynamics. The mismatch had been so complete that I felt almost embarrassed by my own naivety. But embarrassment was a luxury I couldn't afford. I had approximately 10 days before the wedding. 10 days to develop and implement a strategy that would protect Sterling Hotel Group from this planned acquisition and preserve the company that hundreds of employees depended on for their livelihoods. For the first time in my life, I was going to stop being the dutiful daughter who put family harmony ahead of everything else and start being the strategic leader who protected what mattered most, regardless of whose feelings got hurt in the process. The board meeting that morning passed in a surreal blur. I presented the quarterly reports with perfect professionalism while internally calculating how to respond to the threat I had uncovered. Harrison attended as usual, offering insights and suggestions that I now recognized as intelligence gathering for his acquisition planning. Every comment he made, every question he asked, every suggestion he offered was part of his systematic evaluation of our vulnerabilities and his preparation for taking control of our operations. And I sat there, nodding politely and taking notes, while planning my own form of strategic warfare. The war for Sterling Hotel Group's independence was about to begin, and this time, I would be fighting with complete information about my opponent's strategies and full clarity about what I was fighting to protect. The week before Rebecca's wedding became the most intensive strategic planning period of my professional life. While my family focused on final preparations for what they believed was a celebration of love and family unity, I worked 18-hour days developing a comprehensive defense against the corporate takeover I had discovered. The first step was understanding exactly what legal and financial protections Sterling Hotel Group already had in place. I spent 3 days conducting a complete audit of our corporate structure, our partnership agreements with Blackstone Capital Partners, our shareholder arrangements, and our operational contracts. What I discovered was both encouraging and terrifying. Our corporate structure provided some protection against hostile acquisition attempts, but Harrison's team had clearly studied these defenses and had developed strategies to circumvent them through the strategic merger approach they were planning. A key vulnerability was our board of directors composition. While my family maintained controlling interest in Sterling Hotel Group, our board included 3 external members whose votes could be influenced through the right combination of financial incentives and strategic pressure. Harrison's acquisition plans specifically mentioned targeting these board members during Phase 2 of the takeover, offering them lucrative consulting agreements and board positions in the restructured company in exchange for supporting the merger proposal. But I also discovered advantages that Harrison's team might not have fully understood. Our partnership agreement with Blackstone Capital Partners included several clauses that I had insisted on during the original negotiation. Clauses that could be weaponized if necessary to protect our independence. The most important was a termination provision that allowed Sterling Hotel Group to end our exclusive partnership with 60 days written notice if we determined that the relationship was no longer serving our strategic interests. Harrison's team had clearly assumed this partnership would remain in place during their acquisition timeline, providing them continued access to our operations and financial information. They were wrong. I also had advantages they couldn't have anticipated. My legal expertise gave me detailed understanding of corporate law that they probably assumed was limited to routine contract review. My operational knowledge meant I understood exactly which aspects of their efficiency improvements would be most damaging to our long-term success. And my position as COO gave me authority to make certain decisions without requiring board approval. Most importantly, I had complete documentation of their acquisition plans, including their timelines, their financial projections, and their strategies for manipulating my family members. They had no idea that their planning documents had been discovered. On Tuesday, 5 days before the wedding, I took the first concrete step in my counter strategy. I called an emergency meeting with our external legal counsel, the law firm that handled our most sensitive corporate matters, and scheduled it for the following morning at their offices rather than at Sterling Hotel Group headquarters. I need to discuss some confidential matters related to protecting Sterling Hotel Group from potential acquisition attempts. I told the senior partner when I called to request the meeting, and I need absolute discretion about these discussions. Wednesday morning, I presented our legal team with complete documentation of Harrison's acquisition plans and asked them to help me develop a comprehensive defense strategy. The reaction was immediate and gratifying. "This is one of the most sophisticated acquisition manipulation schemes I've seen," said Margaret Chin, the corporate attorney who had worked with Sterling Hotel Group for over 5 years. "The timeline is carefully calculated to exploit family relationships and bypass normal due diligence processes. Whoever developed this strategy understands both corporate law and family dynamics at an expert level. Can we stop it?" I asked directly. "Absolutely, but the strategy will need to be equally sophisticated," she replied. "They're counting on your family's trust and your emotional attachment to maintaining relationships. We'll need to be prepared to prioritize business protection over family harmony." That phrase, prioritizing business protection over family harmony, crystallized exactly what I had been struggling to accept. For my entire adult life, I had sacrificed business advantages to maintain family relationships. Now I was going to have to reverse that priority structure if I wanted to protect what really mattered. Over the next 6 hours, We developed a multi-part strategy designed to neutralize Harrison's acquisition plan while protecting Sterling Hotel Group's independence and our employees' job security. The first element was immediate termination of our partnership with Blackstone Capital Partners. This would eliminate their access to our internal information and prevent them from continuing to position themselves as strategic advisors during the crucial post-wedding period. The second element was restructuring our board of directors to eliminate the vulnerabilities Harrison's team planned to exploit. We would need to replace the 3 external board members with individuals who had stronger loyalty to Sterling Hotel Group's long-term interests. The third element was implementing new corporate governance policies that would make hostile acquisition attempts much more difficult and expensive. These policies would require supermajority votes for major strategic changes and would give existing management extensive veto power over operational restructuring. The fourth element was developing alternative strategic partnerships that would provide the growth opportunities Rebecca was so excited about, but through alliances that protected our independence rather than threatening it. The timing will be crucial, Margaret explained as we finalized the strategy. You'll need to implement these changes before Harrison realizes what's happening, but after the wedding so that family relationships don't complicate the business decisions. How much authority do I have to implement these changes independently? I asked. As COO, you have significant authority over operational decisions and vendor relationships. The partnership termination can be implemented immediately. The board restructuring will require your father's agreement, but the governance policy changes can be positioned as routine corporate housekeeping that protects everyone's interests. Thursday, 4 days before the wedding, I began implementing this strategy. I drafted and executed the formal notice terminating Sterling Hotel Group's partnership with Blackstone Capital Partners, effective 60 days after delivery. The termination letter was professionally written and cited strategic realignment of business priorities as the reason for ending the relationship. I made no mention of the acquisition plans I had discovered, positioning the termination as a routine business decision rather than a defensive maneuver. I hand-delivered the termination notice to Harrison's office myself, wanting to see his reaction when he realized that his carefully planned timeline had just been disrupted. His assistant was clearly surprised to see me arrive without an appointment, but Harrison agreed to see me immediately. When I handed him the termination letter, I watched his expression carefully, looking for signs of how he would respond to this unexpected development. For just a moment, his professional composure slipped, and I saw something that looked like panic flash across his face. Then he recovered and read through the letter with a neutral expression of someone reviewing routine business correspondence. "This is quite unexpected, Victoria," he said finally, his tone carefully controlled. "May I ask what prompted this decision? I thought our partnership had been mutually beneficial." "It has been," I replied with equal professionalism. "But Sterling Hotel Group's strategic priorities are evolving, and we've decided that exclusive partnerships limit our flexibility to explore other opportunities." It was a completely truthful statement, though not the complete truth. Our strategic priorities were indeed evolving. Specifically, they now included protection from acquisition attempts disguised as strategic partnerships. "I see," Harrison said, setting the letter aside. "Well, of course we're disappointed, but we respect Sterling Hotel Group's right to make these decisions. I assume this won't affect the personal relationships between our families." The question was loaded with subtext. He was asking whether I was willing to separate business decisions from family relationships, whether I would allow Rebecca's happiness to be collateral damage in what he was beginning to recognize as a business conflict. "Of course not," I replied smoothly. "Business relationships and family relationships are completely separate matters. We're all looking forward to celebrating with you and Rebecca on Saturday." As I left his office, I felt the exhilaration of finally taking control of a situation that had been controlling me for months. For the first time since Rebecca's engagement announcement, I was acting rather than reacting, making strategic moves rather than simply responding to other people's plans for my future. But I also knew that Harrison would not accept this setback passively. He had invested too much time and planning into acquiring Sterling Hotel Group to abandon the strategy because of one unexpected obstacle. The war for our company's independence had officially begun, and I had just fired the opening shot. What happened next would depend on how quickly and effectively Harrison could adapt his strategy to this new reality. I was about to find out exactly how ruthless he could be when his carefully laid plans were threatened. Rebecca's wedding day dawned with the kind of perfect autumn weather that seemed designed for fairy tale endings. Golden sunlight filtered through maple trees displaying their full fall colors, creating a backdrop so beautiful it looked staged for the society photographers, who had been documenting every aspect of the celebration. The ceremony took place at the Blackstone family estate, with over 300 guests seated in perfectly arranged rows, facing an altar decorated with thousands of white roses and peonies. Rebecca looked absolutely radiant in her Vera Wang gown, gliding down the aisle with the confidence of someone who had never doubted that this moment would be perfect. I stood with the other family members in the front row, wearing a navy silk dress that I had chosen to look appropriately elegant without competing with the bridal party for attention. To any outside observer, I probably appeared to be the proud sister, beaming with happiness at Rebecca's perfect day. In reality, I was calculating how long it would take Harrison to realize that his acquisition timeline had been permanently disrupted by my termination of our partnership agreement, and trying to predict how he would respond once he understood that his plans had been discovered and countered. The ceremony itself was beautiful in the way that unlimited budgets and professional planners could create. Every detail was flawless. From the musicians who played during the processional, to the flowers that had been flown in from Europe to match Vivian Blackstone's vision of sophisticated elegance, Harrison looked handsome and confident as he waited at the altar, every inch the successful heir to a financial empire. When Rebecca reached him, the joy on both their faces seemed completely genuine, and for a moment I wondered if I had somehow misunderstood their motivations and intentions. Then I remembered the acquisition documents I had discovered, the systematic planning to steal our family company, the casual discussions of eliminating employees whose loyalty had been the foundation of our success. Whatever genuine emotions existed between Rebecca and Harrison, they didn't change the fundamental threat his marriage posed to Sterling Hotel Group and everyone whose livelihood depended on our continued independence. The reception was held in a massive tent that had been constructed on the estate's oceanfront lawn. The interior was decorated to look like an elegant ballroom, with crystal chandeliers suspended from the tent ceiling and tables adorned with centerpieces that probably cost more than most people's monthly salaries. I found myself seated at the family table with my parents, Harrison's parents, and several Blackstone relatives I had never met. The conversation was polite and celebratory, focused on how beautiful the ceremony had been and how happy Rebecca and Harrison appeared together. "They make such a perfect couple," my mother said, for what must have been the 10th time that day. "And the opportunities this marriage creates for both families, it's like something out of a storybook." Vivian Blackstone nodded graciously, raising her champagne glass in a toast. "To the merger of two families and two business legacies. May this partnership bring prosperity and success to everyone involved." Partnership, merger, prosperity for everyone involved. The language was careful and deliberate, but I heard the business implications behind every word. Even at their son's wedding reception, the Blackstones were thinking about corporate strategy and acquisition opportunities. During the dinner, I excused myself to visit the restroom, needing a few minutes away from the celebratory atmosphere and the constant reminders of what this marriage really represented for Sterling Hotel Group's future. As I was returning to the reception tent, I overheard a conversation that confirmed my worst suspicions about how quickly Harrison intended to escalate his acquisition timeline, now that his original strategy had been disrupted. Harrison was standing near the entrance to the tent with two men I didn't recognize, speaking in low tones that suggested they were discussing business rather than wedding celebration topics. "The partnership termination accelerates our timeline significantly," Harrison was saying, his voice carrying the clipped authority of someone who was accustomed to making crucial decisions under pressure. "We'll need to move to phase 2 implementation immediately after the honeymoon." "What about the family resistance?" one of the other men asked. The younger sister's termination of the advisory agreement suggests she's more sophisticated than your initial assessment indicated. Victoria Sterling's sophistication is exactly why we need to accelerate the timeline, Harrison replied. She's competent enough to create obstacles, but she doesn't have the authority or the family support to prevent the acquisition if we move quickly and decisively. And Rebecca Sterling's cooperation? Rebecca's cooperation is guaranteed, Harrison said, with a confidence that made my stomach turn. She's completely committed to the strategic vision we've outlined. She'll support whatever steps are necessary to achieve the growth projections we've discussed. My own sister. He was planning to use Rebecca's enthusiasm and her trust in his strategic vision to overcome any resistance from the rest of the family. She would become his advocate for corporate changes that would ultimately eliminate my role and transform Sterling Hotel Group into something unrecognizable. I pressed myself against the side of the tent, desperate to hear more, while praying I wouldn't be discovered eavesdropping on this business discussion. The board members' agreements are in place? Harrison asked. 2 confirmed, 1 still negotiating terms, the second man replied. But we expect full compliance once the financial incentives are properly structured. Excellent. Schedule the first strategic planning meeting for the week we return from Tuscany. I want the restructuring proposal ready for board presentation within 30 days. 30 days. He was planning to present his acquisition proposal to Sterling Hotel Group's board of directors within a month of the wedding, using his new status as family member to push through changes that would fundamentally alter our company's ownership and management structure. As I stood there in the shadows, listening to Harrison discuss the systematic dismantling of everything I had worked to build, I felt the last traces of family loyalty and conflict avoidance disappear completely. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a difference of strategic vision. This was a calculated theft being executed by someone who had gained our trust specifically to exploit that trust for corporate gain. Harrison was using his marriage to my sister as a weapon against our family business. And he was counting on our emotional attachments to prevent us from recognizing the threat until it was too late to respond effectively. I returned to the reception with absolute clarity about what I needed to do. The war for Sterling Hotel Group's independence couldn't wait for a more convenient time or a less emotionally complex situation. Every day I delayed implementing the defensive strategy gave Harrison more time to solidify his position and recruit allies for his acquisition plan. The remainder of the reception passed in a surreal blur. I smiled and made appropriate conversation while internally calculating timelines and strategic moves. I congratulated Rebecca and Harrison with apparent warmth while planning to systematically dismantle the business relationship that had made their marriage possible. I listened to toasts celebrating their future together while developing strategies to ensure that their future wouldn't include ownership of Sterling Hotel Group. During Rebecca and Harrison's first dance, I watched my sister glow with happiness as she moved across the dance floor with her new husband. She looked beautiful and radiant and completely innocent of the corporate warfare that was about to unfold around their marriage. For just a moment, I felt a stab of regret for what I was about to set in motion. Rebecca genuinely loved Harrison, and her excitement about their shared future was real and touching. My actions would inevitably complicate their marriage and force them to choose between family loyalty and business ambition. But then I remembered the acquisition documents, the systematic planning to eliminate employees who had given years of loyal service, the casual dismissal of company values that had taken decades to develop. I thought about the hundreds of people whose jobs depended on Sterling Hotel Group remaining independent and committed to sustainable business practices rather than short-term profit maximization. Individual happiness, even my sister's happiness, couldn't take priority over the welfare of hundreds of employees and the preservation of a company that represented 45 years of my grandfather's vision and dedication. As the reception concluded and guests began saying their farewells, I approached Rebecca for what I knew might be our last conversation as sisters who trusted each other completely. "You looked absolutely beautiful today," I told her, giving her a hug that felt both genuine and final. I hope you and Harrison have a wonderful honeymoon in Tuscany. Thank you for being here, Vic, she replied, her happiness so radiant that it was almost painful to witness. I know these big social events aren't your favorite thing, but it meant so much to have family support. Of course, I said, memorizing her face in this moment of pure joy. I'll always support you, Rebecca, even when that support looks different than you might expect. She was too happy and too distracted to notice the subtle warning in my words, but she would understand their meaning soon enough. As I drove home that evening, still wearing my elegant navy dress, but feeling like I had just attended a funeral rather than a wedding, I knew that the real battle for Sterling Hotel Group's future was about to begin. Harrison had made a critical error in underestimating my capabilities and my determination to protect what mattered most. He had assumed that family loyalty would make me compliant and that my emotional attachments would prevent me from taking decisive action. He was about to discover just how wrong those assumptions were. The corporate takeover that had been planned so carefully was about to backfire spectacularly. And I was going to ensure that the consequences fell on the people who deserved them rather than on the innocent employees and family members who had been targeted for elimination. The war had been declared at a wedding reception, disguised as strategic planning discussions and spoken in corporate euphemisms. But the response would be delivered through legal documents, board resolutions, and strategic decisions that would permanently alter the power dynamics Harrison thought he understood. By the time Rebecca and Harrison returned from their honeymoon, Sterling Hotel Group would be completely protected from acquisition attempts, and the carefully laid plans for corporate theft would be nothing but expensive lesson in why underestimating your opposition is always a strategic mistake. The dutiful daughter who had prioritized family harmony above all else was gone forever, replaced by a strategic leader who would protect what mattered most, regardless of whose feelings got hurt in the process. The real Victoria Sterling was finally ready to fight. 3 weeks after Rebecca and Harrison returned from their honeymoon in Tuscany, I orchestrated what would become known in our family as the Monday Morning Massacre, though I prefer to think of it as justice finally catching up with people who had mistaken kindness for weakness. Harrison had scheduled his promised strategic planning meeting for a Tuesday morning, confident that he could present his acquisition proposal to Sterling Hotel Group's board and secure approval through a combination of financial incentives and family pressure. He had spent his honeymoon finalizing the details with his legal team, preparing presentations that would make the hostile takeover look like a generous opportunity for our family to maximize our asset value while reducing operational stress. He had no idea that I had spent those same 3 weeks systematically dismantling every assumption his strategy depended on. The first shock came when he arrived at our headquarters building Monday morning to find a security guard waiting with a letter informing him that his building access had been revoked. As an external consultant whose partnership agreement had been terminated, he no longer had authorization to enter Sterling Hotel Group facilities without explicit invitation and escort. "There seems to be some mistake," he told our head of security, his tone carrying the entitled authority of someone who had never been denied access to anything he wanted. "I'm Harrison Blackstone. I'm married to Rebecca Sterling. I have a meeting scheduled with the executive team tomorrow." "I understand, Mr. Blackstone," replied James Martinez, our security director, with the polite professionalism I had coached him to maintain. "However, building access is determined by current business relationships, not family relationships. If you have a scheduled meeting, the meeting organizer can arrange for an escort." Harrison called Rebecca immediately, and I listened from my office as she rushed downstairs to resolve what she assumed was a simple administrative error. The conversation that followed, conducted in our lobby, where several employees could witness it, was both illuminating and devastating. "Victoria, there's been some kind of mix-up with Harrison's building access," Rebecca said when she called to ask me to come downstairs. "Could you please straighten this out?" "There's no mix-up," I replied calmly. "Harrison's building access was based on our partnership agreement with Blackstone Capital Partners. Since we terminated that agreement, there's no business justification for providing him unrestricted access to our facilities." But he's family now, Rebecca protested, her voice rising with a combination of embarrassment and confusion. He doesn't need business justification. Family members who aren't employees don't automatically receive building access, I explained, maintaining the patient tone I might use with any confused relative. If Harrison needs to visit for personal reasons, you can certainly escort him, but professional access requires professional authorization. The implications of this policy began to dawn on Harrison immediately. Without building access, he couldn't continue his casual meetings with board members, his informal consultations with department heads, or his systematic gathering of operational intelligence. His integration into Sterling Hotel Group's strategic planning had been abruptly and completely severed. "This is about more than building access," Harrison said, speaking directly to me with the first hint of anger I had ever seen him display. "This is about the partnership termination, and whatever game you think you're playing." "I'm not playing any games," I replied with absolute sincerity. "I'm protecting Sterling Hotel Group's interests, exactly as my position as COO requires me to do." The second shock came when Harrison attempted to contact the 3 external board members he had been cultivating, expecting to finalize their support for his acquisition proposal. What he discovered was that all 3 had been replaced during the previous week through a board restructuring I had initiated with my father's enthusiastic approval. Margaret Chen, our corporate attorney, had helped me identify 3 new board candidates with impeccable hospitality industry credentials and absolute loyalty to family-owned business principles. The recruitment process had been swift and decisive once I explained that we needed board members who would prioritize long-term stability over short-term profit opportunities. "Dad, I don't understand what's happening." Rebecca called my father in tears after Harrison informed her that his planned board presentation was impossible due to the board composition changes. "Why are we making all these sudden changes without family discussion? Why is Victoria making decisions that affect Harrison's involvement in company planning?" "Rebecca, sweetheart," Victoria explained the situation to me very clearly. My father replied with a firmness I hadn't heard from him in years. "Some of Harrison's associates approached our board members with acquisition proposals that would fundamentally change Sterling Hotel Group's ownership structure. We can't have board members whose loyalties might be compromised by outside financial interests." "What acquisition proposals?" Rebecca asked, and I could hear the growing panic in her voice. "Harrison never mentioned acquisition proposals. He's been talking about strategic partnerships and operational optimization." "Sometimes," my father said gently, "strategic partnerships and operational optimization are euphemisms for acquisition and elimination of existing management. Your sister's legal expertise helped us recognize the threat and respond appropriately." A third and most devastating shock came when Harrison attempted to schedule meetings with our department heads, expecting to continue building support for his operational restructuring plans. What he discovered was that every single department head had been briefed about the acquisition attempt and had been specifically instructed not to participate in any strategic planning discussions with external consultants. Moreover, I had shared selected portions of Harrison's internal memos with our senior staff, specifically the portions discussing mass layoffs, cost-cutting measures, and elimination of employee benefits that formed the foundation of his efficiency improvements. The reaction had been immediate and unanimous: absolute loyalty to current management and complete resistance to any changes that would compromise job security or company culture. "You've poisoned the entire organization against me," Harrison accused me during a confrontation in the parking garage, his composure finally cracking under the pressure of watching his carefully planned acquisition strategy collapse in real time. "I've educated our employees about threats to their job security," I corrected him. "If that education makes them resistant to your optimization plans, perhaps your optimization plans weren't in their best interests." "Those plans would have made this company more profitable and more competitive," he insisted, his voice rising with frustration. Your attachment to inefficient operational models is going to limit Sterling Hotel Group's growth potential. Our current operational models have generated 40% profit growth over 5 years, while maintaining industry-leading employee satisfaction and customer loyalty scores, I replied. I'm not sure your definition of efficiency aligns with our definition of success. The fourth shock came when Harrison finally received the comprehensive legal analysis his attorneys had prepared regarding Sterling Hotel Group's vulnerability to acquisition attempts. What they discovered was that every potential vulnerability had been systematically eliminated through new corporate governance policies, revised shareholder agreements, and strategic partnerships that provided growth opportunities without compromising independence. The legal barriers I had constructed were so comprehensive and professionally crafted that overcoming them would require years of expensive litigation with no guarantee of success. The acquisition that Harrison had expected to complete within 6 months was now legally impossible without the voluntary cooperation of Sterling Hotel Group's existing ownership and management. The final shock came when Harrison realized that his own financial position had been compromised by his failed acquisition attempt. Blackstone Capital Partners had invested significant resources in planning and preparation for acquiring Sterling Hotel Group, including legal fees, consulting costs, and financial commitments to the board members whose support was no longer available. The partnership termination had also eliminated millions in annual consulting revenue that Blackstone had been counting on to maintain their hospitality investment portfolio's profitability. Harrison's failure to execute the acquisition meant that his division was now showing significant losses rather than the profits that had been projected based on Sterling Hotel Group integration. "You have no idea what you've done," Harrison told me during our final confrontation, his mask of professional courtesy completely abandoned. "This isn't over, Victoria. There are other ways to achieve the same objectives." "Actually, there aren't," I replied with the satisfaction of someone who had anticipated every possible countermove. "But I appreciate your confidence in attempting to find them." Rebecca and I met for lunch 6 months after her wedding, our first private conversation since the corporate warfare had concluded. She looked older, sadder, but also somehow more real than she had during the months of wedding planning and strategic excitement. "I need to understand what happened," she said without preamble, her usual charm replaced by exhaustion and genuine confusion. "Harrison says you sabotaged his vision for expanding our family business. Dad says Harrison was trying to steal our company. I don't know who to believe anymore." I handed her a folder containing copies of the acquisition documents I had discovered, the internal memos discussing elimination of family management, and the financial projections showing how Blackstone planned to profit from dismantling everything our grandfather had built. She read in silence for nearly 30 minutes, her expression shifting from confusion to horror to something that looked like grief for the naive trust she could never recover. "He really was planning to steal Sterling Hotel Group," she asked finally. "He was planning to acquire it through strategic manipulation and family pressure, then restructured in ways that would eliminate jobs, reduce service quality, and maximize short-term profits," I confirmed. "The acquisition would have made him very wealthy while destroying everything that makes our company special. And I was helping him do it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was so excited about being part of something bigger, about achieving growth that would make Dad proud, that I never questioned whether the growth was worth the cost." "You couldn't have known," I said gently, meaning it. "Harrison's manipulation was sophisticated and targeted specifically at your desires and aspirations. He used your love for our family and your ambitions for our company against both." "Are you and I going to be okay?" she asked, and I could hear genuine fear in the question. "We're going to be different," I replied honestly. "I can't go back to being the dutiful sister who prioritizes family harmony over protecting what matters most. And you can't go back to being naive about the difference between strategic partnerships and strategic threats. But we're still sisters?" "We're still sisters," I confirmed. "We're just sisters who understand each other more clearly now." Sterling Hotel Group thrived over the following year. Without the distraction of acquisition threats and efficiency optimization pressure, we focused on sustainable growth that aligned with our values. We expanded into 2 new markets, improved employee benefits, and achieved recognition as one of the best companies to work for in the hospitality industry. Our customer satisfaction scores reached all-time highs, our employee retention rate became a model for the industry, and our profit margins continued their upward trajectory without sacrificing the relationships that made success meaningful. Harrison and Rebecca's marriage survived, though it required extensive counseling and complete transparency about the acquisition attempt. Harrison formally apologized to our family and agreed to permanent separation between his business activities and Sterling Hotel Group's operations. The experience taught him expensive lessons about the difference between strategic vision and strategic exploitation. Blackstone Capital Partners restructured Harrison's division and refocused their hospitality investments on partnerships that didn't require acquisition or operational control. The failed Sterling Hotel Group acquisition attempt became a cautionary tale in their industry about the risks of underestimating family-owned business leaders who appeared cooperative but were actually strategic. As for me, I never again made the mistake of prioritizing relationships over principles or family harmony over protecting what I had worked to build. I learned that sometimes love requires being willing to disappoint people, that sometimes loyalty requires being disloyal to those who exploit that loyalty, and that sometimes protecting what matters most requires being willing to fight for it regardless of who gets hurt in the process. The corporate takeover that was supposed to eliminate my role instead established me as the unquestioned leader of Sterling Hotel Group's strategic direction. My father stepped back to chairman emeritus. Rebecca focused on marketing and customer relations where her social skills were genuinely valuable, and I assumed the CEO position I had been preparing for my entire professional life. 3 years later, when Harvard Business School invited me to speak about family business leadership and hostile acquisition defense strategies, I titled my presentation, "How Underestimating Your Opposition Can Backfire Spectacularly." The lecture hall was packed with business students, family business leaders, and corporate strategy specialists who wanted to understand how a carefully planned acquisition attempt had been so completely and decisively defeated by someone who had appeared to be powerless to resist it. The most important lesson, I told them as I concluded my presentation, is that competence and strategic thinking are often mistaken for compliance and operational support. If you're planning to acquire a family business, make sure you understand the difference between appearing cooperative and actually being vulnerable. And if you're the person everyone underestimates, remember that being underestimated is one of the most powerful strategic advantages you can possess, as long as you're willing to use it when the situation requires decisive action. The applause was sustained and enthusiastic, but the real satisfaction came from knowing that Sterling Hotel Group was stronger, more independent, and more committed to our values than ever before. The dutiful daughter who had been targeted for elimination was gone forever, replaced by a CEO who understood that protecting what matters most sometimes requires being willing to disappoint people who mistake kindness for weakness. In the end, the corporate takeover that was supposed to backfire on Sterling Hotel Group backfired on the people who had planned it instead. Justice, it turned out, had a sense of irony that was both poetic and profitable. And I had learned the most valuable lesson of my professional life. Never let anyone mistake your competence for compliance, your strategic thinking for operational support, or your willingness to maintain family harmony for inability to fight strategically when fighting becomes necessary. The Sterling Empire was saved, strengthened, and secure. And the woman who saved it was finally recognized for exactly who she had always been, not the dutiful daughter content to work in the background, but the strategic leader who had been preparing her entire life for the moment when protecting what mattered most required everything she had learned, everything she had sacrificed, and everything she was willing to risk. The corporate takeover had indeed backfired, just not on the people who deserved it. If you enjoyed this story of strategic justice and family business warfare, please subscribe for more authentic stories about finding your power when everyone expects you to stay powerless.